I was visiting Thailand and Bangladesh this last visit. I thank the governments of Bangladesh and Thailand for facilitating this mission and the resident coordinators of Thailand and Bangladesh who have always been extremely helpful and supportive of my missions. This occasion has given me pause to reflect on my time in this region over the last 6 years. When I took up my mandate in 2014, it was a time of great optimism for Myanmar's burgeoning democratic transition, promising reforms, and encouraging progress. My first mission to Myanmar was in July 2014. I visited Yangon, Naypyidaw, Rakhine, Kachin, and Mandalay and met with authorities, civil society, victims, religious and ethnic community leaders, the United Nations and international community. Over the next 3 years, I traveled widely around the country, including to different parts of Kachin, Shan, Rakhine, Kayin, and Mon, and continued to meet with a diverse range of stakeholders and engage with the government about how it could improve the human rights situation. In January of 2017, I visited northern Rakhine. I saw the sites of the alleged attacks by ARSA in October 2016 and met with villagers following the security operations that involved mass human rights violations against the Rohingya population. Following that, I had my first visit to Bangladesh in 2017 February. I met with some of the 800,000 Rohingya who had been forced out during the security operations following 9 October 2016 and were living in makeshift camps in Cox's Bazar together with Rohingya refugees who had been there for up to 25 years. It was then that I was informed of the worst atrocities committed by human beings against their fellow people having taken place, including killings, torture, dismembering of body parts, slitting of throats and breasts, children being thrown into fires, and gang rapes. It was after my mission in July 17 when I visited Yangon, Naypyidaw, Sitwe, Chokpyu, Butidong, and Mongdo in Rakhine, Pa'an in Kayin State, and Lashio in northern Shan, that the Parliament resolved to reject my end of mission statement for being biased. In December 2017, after having requested a visit to the country for January of 2018, my request was denied. The government then went on to request the Human Rights Council president to replace me as Special Rapporteur. My access has not been granted since then. That has led me to visit Bangladesh for 4 more times in January and July of 2018, January of 2019, and now. I have visited Thailand several times and Malaysia in 2019, July. People from Myanmar who suffered human rights violations and abuses are present in all those countries. I am very thankful to the government of Bangladesh for allowing me to visit numerous times and to hold my press conference here again. Yet I am disappointed that Myanmar did not reverse its decision not to allow me access for the last time. As a special rapporteur, I must speak the truth. From the outset of my mandate, I told them I was committed to call a spade a spade. Obviously, the government of Myanmar, the truth I was speaking was not to their liking. After 6 years of visiting the region and monitoring the situation in Myanmar, what I have seen have quashed the optimism I initially felt. How could I be optimistic with ongoing credible allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possible genocide having been committed in Myanmar, and with justice and accountability still not yet within reach. However, I still hold out hope that the promised democratic transition will proceed, and it is not too late for the government to change the course it is currently set to. During my mission this time, I had the opportunity to interact with and receive information from victims, Myanmar civil society, experts, non-government organizations, the international community, the United Nations in Myanmar, Thailand, and Bangladesh, refugees of the Myanmar military Tatmadaw and security forces in Rakhine. This is horrific testimony. This horrific testimony echoes others that I have received from people in other ethnic states during my mandate, in addition to the first-hand reports of rape I have received from numerous Rohingya women in Rakhine and in Cox's Bazar camps over the course of my visits here. I also met with a group of Rohingya Christians who are in a most difficult position. They told me they were persecuted due to their religion by the Myanmar government while they lived in Rakhine, and now they face hostility and violence from a small number of other camp residents. This worries me. It strikes me that the situation for refugees in the Cox's Bazar camps, though stable, is stagnating now that the humanitarian response to the crisis of 2017 is in its third year. I am heartened to have heard government officials speak of longer-term planning, and I convey to them what they can do to bring about education, skills training, and livelihoods, which the refugees yearn for. Refugees expressed to me their sincere gratitude to the government and people of Bangladesh for giving them shelter and safety from violence and persecution in Myanmar. But they also told me of their anguish over their children's future should they continue to receive no formal education. As one father said to me, "Don't do anything for us here. Just help our children." I understand that authorities are considering piloting the Myanmar curriculum and introducing advanced primary education. I hope that they make positive decisions, as these initiatives will assist the refugees' eventual return from home to Myanmar and support a future for their children. Above all the refugees I spoke with told me their deep desire to return home. However, I was informed by them and other stakeholders about ongoing violence, continuing restrictions on movement, forced imposition of NVCs, and people being killed and injured by landmines in northern Rakhine. This, in addition to the ongoing armed conflict in Rakhine between the Arakan army and the Tatmadaw, demonstrates to me that the conditions remain unstable for their return. To the Rohingya I have come to know over the years I have been visiting you here, you are my inspiration. In the face of such adversity, you have come together with a peaceful and clear message. You want to go home with your basic human rights. You must not give up hope. I was informed by multiple interlocutors about the devastating impact of the intensifying conflict between the Arakan army and the Tatmadaw, which has become entrenched over the last year. The restrictions imposed by the government, including the internet shutdown in 4 townships and the blockade of aid in 8 townships, recently with the addition of Myanmar, severely exacerbate that impact. I was informed that without government permission, community-based organizations are not even allowed to provide food to displaced people, of which there are now approximately over 100,000 reported living in camps and sheltering in villages. There are also 1,800 people displaced in southern Shan. I am also very worried about both sides engaging in disturbing tactics, including abductions, targeting family members, and mass arrests, and how this is instilling fear in the civilian population. I welcome the release of the Chin State MP, U Wei Tin, by the Arakan Army. Both sides must ensure there their systematic compliance with international humanitarian law, in particular the principle of distinction and international human rights law. The situation in northern Shan remains volatile, with armed conflict ongoing, village leaders reportedly being targeted by the military and ethnic armed organizations, and civilian fatalities reportedly caused by gunfire and landmines. In Kachin State, too, though the conflict has slowed, landmines continue to injure and kill civilians, causing the effects of past conflict to reach into the present and future. I was told that the residents of Namsanyang village in Wangmao Township, who recently returned from IDP camps under the supervision of the Tamadol, are unable to cultivate their land due to landmine contamination, leaving them no access to food and livelihood. In this context, and with ongoing armed conflict in western and northern Myanmar, I am still concerned that it may be premature for the government to be implementing its camp closure strategy. Full and transparent consultations are critical to understand and realize the wishes of IDPs that the government wishes to relocate. I discussed the upcoming elections with several interlocutors who expressed apprehension about what may occur. It is incumbent on the government to ensure that they are peaceful, credible, free, and fair, that all people in the country are able to equally participate, and that political debate is open and welcome. It is critical that debate is not repressed by nationalistic vitriol or draconian laws that infringe on the right of freedom of expression and freedom of association. Some interlocutors expressed worry that polling may not be allowed in certain areas for security reasons. This was expressed in particular in relation to Rakhine and Shan. If that occurs, distrust towards the new government and community grievances and marginalization that already exist are only going to grow stronger. And this will further hamper efforts to move forward in the democratic transition and peace process. Last week, it was announced that the new members of the Myanmar National Human Rights Commission had been selected. When I spoke at the Human Rights Council in September last year, I called for amendments to be made to the Commission's enabling law, for the Commissioner selection process to be transparent and inclusive, and for the new commissioners to be selected to reflect the pluralism of Myanmar society. I am disappointed to say that despite my hopes and those of civil society, none of these steps were taken. Instead, new commissioners were appointed last week, and several of them came from the military. This is highly disappointing. I repeat my call for the government to reform the commission so that it accords with the Paris Principle to enable it to credibly and independently promote and protect the human rights of all individuals in all circumstances. During my mission, I spoke to people about the situation in garment factories. Workers have been taking industrial action after being paid less than minimum wages or being refused leave. Some have been reported suffering abuse and sexual harassment by their employers. One woman I spoke to took part in a protest has been unjustly charged under the problematic peaceful assembly and peaceful procession law, which I have called on to be amended many times. She has to travel 180 kilometers every fortnight to attend court at great personal expense. I was informed that in other cases, the local authorities have attempted to pressure workers into signing statements that claim they will not protest again. Such infringements on rights will not support the development of a strong sector that benefits the people of Myanmar. More must be done by the government, Myanmar employers, associations, and unions to empower workers and improve conditions. The government has a duty to protect the right to freedom of association and should be encouraging social dialogue to prevent disputes. This is all the more important as I have been informed that there are plans to build many more garment factories to feed the global demand for fast fashion. I remind global fashion brands and buyers that they have a responsibility to ensure that they are respecting human rights throughout their supply chains, in line with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. I recall that it is nearly the 3rd year anniversary of the assassination of Ukoni. While the trial of the man who was accused of shooting him and those who were accused of conspiring to kill him has finished and they were convicted, the alleged ringleader remains at large. It is also 5 years since the brutal rape and killing of 2 volunteer teachers in Kachin. I am informed that the police have lost the evidence from their cases such that investigation and prosecution of the perpetrators is highly unlikely. Justice remains elusive for all 3 victims as the Myanmar justice system remains ineffective, incapable, and unwilling to prosecute perpetrators of human rights violations. Calls for accountability that led to the establishment of the fact-finding mission, the independent investigative mechanism of Myanmar, as well as contributing to other international efforts. Today is a historic day in the quest for justice for Myanmar, with the International Court of Justice handing down its decision on the Gambia's request for provisional measures to be ordered against Myanmar in relation to their alleged violation of the Genocide Convention. Regardless of the decision that it announced today, it must be recognized that significant steps have been taken towards justice and accountability in the last 3 years. But more needs to be done in order to realize it for all the people of Myanmar. In this context, I note that on Monday, just 3 days before the ICJ's decision will be made, and almost 18 months since its establishment, the Myanmar's government's Independent Commission of Inquiry announced that it had transmitted its final report to the President. I have expressed some concerns about the ICOE on earlier occasions, and I make no comment on the findings set out in the executive summary published by the President's office. Like many of you, I would very much like the opportunity to read the ICOE's report in its entirety, and I call for it to be made public as soon as possible. I urge the international community to keep the credible evidence of ongoing crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide front in mind in its relations in Myanmar. In the face of this, one cannot proceed as if nothing has happened and continues to happen. Carrying on with business as usual will only allow deplorable situations to persist. The Myanmar government must face up to its responsibilities, obligations, and duties. I have no doubt that Myanmar has the ways and means to change its course from slipping back to the dark pre-transition days, to move forward in the direction of an inclusive, democratic, and rights-respecting free nation. Thank you very much. Could you please identify yourself?
I am Mainul Alam. I represent Daily Ittifaq. It's a national Bengali daily. What's your expectation from the ICJ outcome? That how it will help creating the atmosphere that Myanmar will go by the rules and respect human rights, will bring.
Well, as you rightfully said, the decision will be made in less than an hour, about an hour. For me to make any speculations on what the court might decide, I hope the Myanmar government will follow through on the decisions and the recommendations that the court may make, and the international community stays sieged on this issue and brings this issue front in mind so that Myanmar will not evade its own responsibilities. Thank you.
This is Sam by the Human Rights Council. So same thing for the other UN agencies and UN bodies on the situation of Rakhine. Since you are approaching to wind up your mission in next month, so how were you convinced that without having access to Myanmar over the last 2 years, that whether you are convinced with the report you are going to submit?
Thank you. I am absolutely convinced that the report I will submit in March is based on credible facts, and it will be non-biased, impartial, according to the code of conduct that I have to abide by. The only regret that I have is that Myanmar, by not allowing me to come in, I have not had the opportunity to engage with the government authorities. And I think this is actually to their loss, because while I was entering Myanmar, while I still had access, there were several ministries that have come further each time I meet with them. As you remember, when the 2015 election and when the new government was set in place, I provided Aung San Suu Kyi and the government benchmarks for the first 100 days, midterm and long-term benchmarks. And the benchmarks were also general benchmarks and also dedicated to different sectors of the government and of Myanmar, the government apparatus. And so each time I went, there were several ministries that updated me with the progress they had made in the benchmarks. And these were very positive signs. And there are some ways that I can provide technical assistance, more information on how to pursue what they have set to pursue. So I feel that it actually was to Myanmar's loss by not having a special rapporteur access to the government and engaging with the government authorities. There are so many ways for me to engage with independents living in, individuals living in Myanmar, and civil society organizations, and other credible INGOs and UN agencies who have done extensive work and are working with programs in Myanmar. Thank you. I think the government is trying to look at this situation, and I've made my assessment last time, my initial reading last time I was here, but I don't think I have more information on how that situation has developed further since the last time I was here. Unfortunately, the Security Council fails to refer the situation of Myanmar to the International Criminal Court. And I think we must continue to put pressure on the Security Council of its failure to do this by not referring the situation to ICC. The Security Council is really not fulfilling its obligations and its responsibilities set forth under the UN Charter, etc. So that is one thing that more needs to be done. Another thing is that I have been stressing setting up an international ad hoc tribunal dedicated to the situation of Myanmar. Yes.
What expectation do you have from two major UN Security Council members, China and Russia? They are protecting Myanmar in the international circuit. Second, a small question is, in your tenure, have you found anything positive in attitude of the Myanmar government? Have you found anything positive? in that space or anything?
Ah. Anything positive? From afar, it's hard to know because I haven't had conversations with the leadership in Myanmar. So it's hard for me to really say what are the attitudes, any positive attitudes. There may be, but right now I am unaware of them so far. China and Russia in the Security Council, it really is regretful, and it is, and I've said this many times, that it is shameful for those states to not do anything in the face of what all the evidence we have, and just come and look at Cox's Bazar. That's not fabricated news. That's not fake news. So I'm hoping that especially China, with its attempt to become one of the top global leaders. You cannot become a global leader without respecting human rights. And by respecting human rights, you have to seek justice and accountability for all human rights violations. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for that question. I think human rights advocates, in our effort to convince China and Russia to change their mind, but it's not a matter of failing to convince them. It is the manner the Security Council is set up. The permanent fives have a veto power. And this is a situation that was created mid of last century. Things have changed, and this is 21st century. We are approaching another mid of this millennium. So pretty soon, it will be a century-old issue. And I have said this in number of occasions, that the Security Council, there has to be a definite reform on how they deal with serious human rights violations. Yeah. And I forget, there was another question you had? No, okay. Say, do not purchase anything from Myanmar. No.
Okay.
I said the respect for business and human rights is something that we should be very, very aware of. Because if, like the situation I presented of this one garment factory work, there's been many protests in garment factories. Many people, like this lady that I spoke to, are facing the same charge, similar charges. And if you live one place and you have to travel 180 kilometers and you're working, do you get paid for time off? And it's not a one-day trip. And so you have to stay there overnight and then come back. And for this particular lady, the trials have been going on for 4 months already. And she doesn't know when the trials will end. So this is a very dire situation for people who are facing charges where their human rights are violated. Okay? Setting up an ad hoc tribunal, I will be discussing this, I will be presenting this in a little more detail in my Human Rights Council report. And I think, please read my next report.
And you're not going to tell us about it?
No, I have, well, it's like when Sierra Leone, Rwanda, Bosnia-Herzegovina tribunal was set up. So it's pretty much where people, the victims, can seek justice in another court too, which will complement the other efforts.
Professor Lee, thank you very much.
Complementary. It's not going to be set up to expedite another process because the other processes have their own mandates to proceed with. Yes.